everybody. Welcome to another Pilates Hour. Thank you all for joining today. Really fun to start at least our first exercise breakdown of the year. Today, we're going to look at the single and double leg kick. So those are the prone exercises. Sometimes the names get mixed up with single and double leg stretch, but single and double leg kick. And I chose it because I was working with some students recently, and I said, "Okay, you're going to teach this exercise." And they did. They taught the choreography of it. But when I asked, what else could you say? How could you go deeper into the explanation or a feeling or a quality? What else do you have to say about it? They very honestly said, we don't really know. I said, okay, that's going to be part of an exercise breakdown. So let's get into the what's the purpose of the exercise. And I'll jump on where you could see in some of the advertising, Sherry doing the exercise, but I'll just show it really quickly, and then we'll talk about what the goals might be for these particular exercises. So they're both prone. I'm just going to show the body position for single, but they're both prone exercises where at some point you're going to be in a little bit of thoracic extension, and either one leg is bending or both legs are bending, depending on which one of the exercises. And so I'm curious about always this position of either the body long and the knees bent, or potentially the same position with a little bit of thoracic extension, because it's a tough position for people to get into. And it appears in a lot of different exercises, a lot of different Pilates exercises, but also just in other movement forms. So this idea of hip neutral or hip extension, again, depending on the variations that you're doing, and at the same time, knee flexion. So the goal for me and for us in Polestar is to move the leg, right? So you've got this pulsing. It is called single leg kick or double leg kick, but a kick to me is a little bit aggressive. So we have this pulsing of the leg, and we're attempting to keep the body alignment the same throughout. So during the kicking. And what often happens is, because often we don't either have the kind of the extensibility of the hip flexor muscles or the quadricep or both, or we don't have the awareness and control of our trunk and hip, when we're bending the knees, also the hips are starting to flex a little bit. And so you get this movement of the body. So my main goal is that people can do this pulsing motion, whether it's both legs or one leg, and maintain their body, right? So they're maintaining the hip, usually hip neutral position in this particular case. Then we can talk about thoracic extension. That wasn't really the focus that I was going to go into today, but it is an important part of it. In single leg kick, you're holding the thoracic extension position throughout the movement. And in double leg kick, you're kind of going back and forth. So the body is down and the legs are moving, and then the body comes up and the legs extend. So that to me is really what it's about in like the most basic mechanics. You're trying to pulse the legs, but maintain the position. What happens? Well, I already talked about hip flexion. So that's one of the things that you'll see if you're watching it, or if you do this exercise. And again, I welcome you guys. Hopefully you have mats around and you could even get into some of these positions a little bit later on. Is, do your hips flex, and do you even notice that they flex? So sometimes our bodies are moving and we don't really have the awareness to think, wow, I feel, my pelvis going up and down. We're just sometimes not keyed into that or tuned into that, or don't even realize that it's happening. So that's one of the things. Also, just this kind of a lot of swaying and kind of moving and bouncing around. So that's the other thing that often happens, because people kick so aggressively that they're not able to sustain their body position. So it's really a balance of that. It's how much can you do it and how much can you keep the body position. So those are, to me, those are the main, kind of the main things. People mix up the choreography all the time. That I don't really care about, but those are kind of the main meaty parts of it. And so we need to have for this movement, again, a certain amount of hip extension, even if it's just to neutral, or we are going into that little bit, few degrees of hip extension. And then we'll complicate it by bending the knees. So again, if there's not a lot of extensibility of the quadricep muscle for whatever reason, or you don't have enough stability again around the trunk and pelvis to allow for that movement to happen, that's going to add some tension, add some load in a way that we're just not, we can't deal with yet. So we aren't able to do something about that part of it yet. So in our screening, and this is true probably for any, any type of movement screening, we are looking at in our screening something like Superman. And I'll get up and show these in just a moment if you're not familiar. And Superman, the knees are straight because I want to see what can somebody do in getting into their hip extension without adding the knee bend to it. Then I see how that is. And then I go into the prone knee bend where we reach around and we take a hold of the foot and look at that. And then we have the prone press up from the thoracic part of it. So we'll just take a look at these, and I'm just going to keep kind of going back and forth. So in Superman, I'm going to do more the leg part of it. I also like to say superhuman. So we've got women and men and everybody in there, but we're all the way stretched out. Both arms are stretched out on the mat. And it's the combination of thoracic extension and hip extension without extending any more at the lumbar spine. So if I was to do it without my arms to the side, it might look something like this, that I can come into thoracic, I can lift my legs a little bit, but I'm not going so far. And I don't know if you're able to see that, almost just above where my shirt comes and ends is some extension of my lumbar spine. So we wouldn't want to see that. So that's the first thing I'm looking at is, can they do that? And maybe I don't even add the thoracic extension part. Maybe I have them keep their head down on their hands and I just see, can they lift that little bit? For me, I'm really, really, really focused on the knee staying straight as well. So people will lift, but they'll start by bending their knees and they think they're lifting really high. So just lift a little bit and see if you can manage the body and lift the leg. Then we can get into looking at how somebody does holding onto their foot where the knee bends. And can they lift a little bit, again, without going into any more extension, right? So that's where I would look. And if somebody couldn't get all the way down to lying prone, you could certainly do this in quadruped. So you can look and see the leg lift in quadruped. And for some people, it's a little easier because they're not so forced into the position of being flat on the table. But it's also more challenging because you don't have anything telling you where you are in space. And so your body might be more likely to move. So just looking at, again, not right and wrong and harder and easier, but certain people will find it challenging from the floor because they may be all the way at their end range of motion. They actually don't have the hip extension mobility to lift their thigh a little bit off of the mat. So don't be surprised with that. And that's when we see the spine arching, is because we're very goal oriented. We want to do what our teacher has asked us, or what we know as teachers is the movement, but at what cost? So are we just getting the foot up in the air, or are we actually extending the hip? So those might be some things that you'd want to look at. So quadruped's another place to do it. Side lying is another place to do it. You might just stretch straight out on your side and take a hold of the foot that way and do it in side lying, which again, you're not forced to have the hip all the way in neutral or in extension. You could actually have the hip a little bit flexed, meeting somebody where they are, and then see how they go and see how they progress. So think outside the box of where you're looking at these different movement types. when we get into that, then we could think about, so we've thought about just what is it? What do we want? What are some of the goals of it? How we're going to get it. That's another thing. And we've talked in other um, Pilates hours about this concept of reciprocal inhibition. I remember talking with Brent about it. And so we're actually using the body to help facilitate another part of a movement. So if I wanted to get my tricep to lengthen a little bit, right? I could use my bicep and have this idea of the concentric versus the eccentric movement. They can't both lengthen or shorten at the same time, right? One has to shorten, one has to lengthen to get movement, right? You could have isometric contractions, that's different. But to have movement, we can have that idea of one side shortening while one side is lengthening. And this is great. And this is one of the genius pieces of this exercise, because every time I kick, my hamstrings and my hip extensors are switching on to produce movement in my knee. And neurologically, the whole front of my body, the quadricep and the hip flexors, are given a message to lengthen. So you can use it as a tool. So breath is not the only tool, not rule, but this idea is also how we can use the body to facilitate some sort of a change. So just be thinking about that as well. And then we can get into the principles, right? So we always, we're always breathing. So, people have mentioned, oh, well, you didn't talk about breathing. And I'm like, well, no, but yes, do it. Keep doing it so that you stay alive. But the breathing is really important. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it gets in the way. So again, use it if it's helpful. But thinking a little bit more about mobility. So I need a certain amount of hip mobility. I need a certain amount of knee mobility. Maybe somebody's coming back from an injury or a surgery. Maybe they don't have enough knee mobility yet to do a kick that feels good and feels productive. So that might be something you take into consideration. And then the control piece that I mentioned. So we don't want to just bear down and engage all of our trunk muscles and kind of hope for the best, but we do want to have control. And remember, a big piece of control is awareness. So if I'm not even aware that my body is moving, or I'm not aware that that's the goal, that might have to be the priority of keeping the body still or having some external feedback. Maybe I take a picture of myself and I look at my position, or I do a video and I look at how I'm doing, or a teacher comes over and tells me. That's some external feedback helping me to hopefully build my internal feedback. So later on, I can do it on my own without any outside help or coaching. So that awareness piece is super important for the control. All right. So Sarah has a great question. So it's lying prone and looking for hip extension. What cue do you suggest for keeping the front of the pelvis grounded? At first, I might not be too concerned with that. I'm more concerned with the mobility that they have. So as somebody is in side lying, yes, if we were going to go on to do something like side kick, I wouldn't want the pelvis and the spine moving all over the place for side kick as it is. But I might just let things go for a little bit to see if they can figure out how to bend the knee, how to keep the hip elongated. They might be able to put their own hand in front of their pelvis and see how that is. I could put my hand there. And of course, we have all the images of lying against a wall. Like, what if you were lying against a wall that was in front of you, or if you were lying on the floor, or if you were against a wall behind you? So some of those things can help with that. And then maybe have them purposely do a little bit of a pelvic clock motion or some flexion and extension of their spine, so that they also can start to understand and build their awareness. Oh, okay, this is when I'm flexed. This is when I'm extended. This is the middle. Oh, and I can feel that I'm changing something. So that might be helpful as well. And then we'll go into one of our next, when we get into the exercises, is using a bridge to teach this. So again, side lying, to kind of to Sarah's point, there's a lot of freedom, just like in quadruped, there's a lot of freedom of movement. So for some people, that's going to be great. And for other people, you're going to need more feedback into the system to help them with that. So let's look at the movement a little bit more. And I really welcome you, so that we're not just sitting for an hour, is to get on your mat and do some of these things with me. Some you can do in standing, some you can just imagine if you're at your desk and working, that's okay. Or some people would tell me, oh, I was driving when I was listening. So don't do it if you're driving. But if you have an opportunity, try some of the things, because it's really meaningful to put the kind of the thought of it and listening to what we're doing and watching it, putting it into your body. That's a great way to just make it deeper. And I did see one other question. Yeah, so Sherry has a great point. She said for someone with a larger belly, larger breasts, or somebody with a lot of kyphosis or hyperkyphosis, would you bolster? And absolutely. I've used all kinds of different pillows and wedges and different things under the chest, under the abdomen, under both, trying to prop people up. That's a great idea. So use anything that you can do to make people comfortable. All right, so let's get on the mats. And just a few ideas of things to start with. And right away, people often go to, oh, well, do I kick 2 times or 1 time or 3 times? Should my foot be flexed or pointed? And all of those things are important if you're trying to recreate a particular bit of choreography. So if the school you learned from likes 2 kicks with a flexed foot, and they say do single leg kick, you should do it with 2 kicks with a flexed foot. But if you're doing the movement to understand its effect on the body, then those things don't really matter so much in the beginning. You could do it flexed or pointed, or 2 kicks or 3 or 1. What's really important is what's going on almost before that happens. So you've heard me many times talk about, if you've done anything with me, this idea of making space in the joint and going around. And I learned that as a concept in my gyrotonic training. So anytime you bend the knee or bend the elbow, you feel like you're creating some space. And actually, if you aren't able to lie down, you can do this with your arm. I'll show it. I'll actually show it with the arm. So if you imagine that there was something just at the inside of your elbow, and sometimes I'll just take my finger and put it there. And if you were going to bend, and whatever is in the crease of your elbow is very fragile, you don't want to just bend and squish whatever is there. Can you make the inside of your elbow feel like it's going around whatever is there? You can have the image of something. You can actually put something there. Sometimes I'll say a bubble. Sometimes I'll say a little egg, a something. Can you make space with that? If you're on your mat, try that with your legs. So again, something behind your knee. Imagine it. It's hard to hold something there. But as you're bending your knee, can you create some space there that if there was something very fragile, you could bend all the way around it without collapsing it or squishing it or breaking it? And then I'm curious what you feel is the response of doing that. So as you bend and you go around, or as you bend your arm and go around, what else do you feel? Hopefully what you noticed is that either your arm or your leg, so your femur and your thigh, or your humerus and your upper arm, lengthened. And that's this co-contraction idea. So as I do this, I could just bend it or I could lengthen. And when you get that length, especially doing this exercise of single and double leg kick, as the thigh lengthens more, you're hopefully more likely to keep the pelvis flat. There's a lovely co-contraction deep in the joint to hold your femur where it is. And then your knee can bend and you can do the pulsing, even getting a little bit more pulsed with it, almost toward the kick, without your body going all over the place. So that's one thing. I have given that image to people and they do the, yeah, I just don't get it. I don't understand what you're talking about. which is okay. So the other thing that I will have people do is to try to get their knee closer and closer and closer and closer to the end of their mat. It's the same idea. I'm trying to get my hip flexors. And remember, the hip flexor is not just right here, right? The hip flexor is inside your pelvis and runs up your spine, right? So you have these columns of support and musculature here, plus the quadricep. So all of that needs to lengthen. Otherwise, you're going to look like that. So any way you can get there, that's great. The other common cue that I hear, I don't hear it as much anymore, but I still hear it, is to push the pubic bone down, usually accompanied with to protect your back. I really want, as teachers, those of you that are teachers and teach any type of movement, be really aware of what that might mean to someone. You need to do this during this exercise because it's likely to hurt you. That's the flip side of to protect your back. Unless somebody has a major something going on, lying down and moving their leg a little bit is not going to injure them. It might flare something up, it might be uncomfortable, but it's not going to injure them, right? I mean, there's always the possibility of something, but not likely to happen. Brent talks about, you could, do Pilates all day long, and most of the things that you would do ever in a Pilates session are not going to cause tissue damage. We could irritate something. You'll certainly get sore muscles if you use them enough, but we're not going to injure somebody with Pilates. So please, please, please be aware if you say that frequently, what your clients might be taking back from that. We don't want them to be fearful of movement, or especially not of Pilates. So that's that piece of it. Now, when we're flat, before you've done this, and this is a little bit more leaning toward now double leg kick, but really any of the prone exercises, what you'll often see people looking like in their upper body is a little bit lifted this way. I don't remember who said, I think it was Sherry said something about people being a little bit over kyphotic or hyper kyphotic, and this feeling of being here. So as someone is able to, and I'm going to keep my head up a little bit, I know it messes with the sound, but as somebody's able to, get them to get as much of their sternum, shoulders, collarbones closer and closer and closer to the mat. You're not going to touch all of it, but it's amazing when you get out of kyphosis or out of flexion into more length, how much easier it is to go into your prone press up. And this is for the arm assisted part with single, and then different assistance when we get into double, where we're actually allowing the shoulders to retract a little bit, reaching the arms back and coming into the position here. So that's another piece of that puzzle. And then I didn't finish with my whole thought on the pelvis. Just have the whole pelvis kind of flat to the mat. So pushing the pubic bone down neurologically is telling the nervous system to go into flexion. So you have a flexion moment at the pelvis, yet we're trying to go into extension. So that's usually not the best piece of information for people to heavily press the pubic bone down. Of course, if it's up, tell them to put it down, but that's the whole piece. Then let's look a little bit now at single and what's going on with the arms. So traditionally, the arms are a little bit more underneath and the spine is a little higher. And you can see how that really lends itself to being more lengthened. And typically, if I do go toward extension, I usually extend more in my lumbar spine. You can see that, at least I can see, the beauty of watching ourselves as we're doing these things, that my thoracic spine is pretty straight. I'm not really in thoracic extension. So don't confuse lifting up with being an extension. I'm in lumbar extension. So I'm now more frequently teaching it where the lowest ribs stay down. You're pulling more with the arms, and we're really getting the arm to torso connection a little bit more in play. So that sense of pulling, I'm trying to get my humerus, right? I've got my lats, my teres are getting my arm connected to my body. I'm using that to my advantage. And the lower I stay, the more likely I am to have thoracic extension and not lumbar extension, right? So that's the goal for that piece. And then let's just look at double. So same idea, hands down, elbows down if it's comfortable, but they don't have to go all the way down. And now I have both legs bending. And the idea of that rocking, right? Oh, it looks like I'm starting to do swan or my pelvis coming up in the air. That's a lot more likely to happen now. So I have to really think about my knees lengthening. And then as I stretch, I come up. Same idea here. I could certainly have the arms separated if the shoulder doesn't feel good. Then on the other side and reach. And this makes me think a lot of Sherry Betts, because when we were teaching together, we would talk about the whole idea of tempo. And sometimes, because these have a briskness to them, right? It's a pulse. We're doing this movement with a little bit more feeling. And people would do it very soft. Like, oh, bring it up to tempo. So once somebody learns it, teach it slow. But once somebody learns it, add a tempo to it so it has something. It doesn't have to be super fast, but it needs to have a rhythm to it. So pick that. All right, there's a few things here. Let's see. So, Rachel, is there a certain amount of thoracic extension we're looking for, or shoulder over elbow position, or is that too much thoracic extension? You know, we just don't have a lot of thoracic extension. So I'm happy if people can just be in less flexion even. Sometimes they might start with this much and they get to here. I'm super excited by that because it's a tough thing to get into, the whole bit of thoracic extension. And so any amount is great, or less flexion is great, more length. And the shoulder over elbow is usually the point that is going to push people into lower thoracic and lumbar extension. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. We need to be able to, if our tasks are recreation, if I'm trying to practice doing back bends, I need to be able to extend in my lumbar spine. But it already extends. So I really need to put my work in to get thoracic extension, to get my shoulder flexion range of motion. Again, if I'm doing a back bend, my hip extension range or shoulder flexion range of motion, hip extension range of motion, so that I create this really balanced curve, as opposed to, you'll see sometimes people have a lot of bend one place and their body's very straight, and they have a lot of bend somewhere else. We'd really like it to be consistent. So I say elbows forward of the shoulders and get the work and the movement up in the upper back. But it's fine to bring your elbows under too. I mean, I'm not married to any one particular way, as long as it serves the purpose. So let's see. Christine has a question of should you then cue lift your thigh off the mat? Sure, absolutely, to make it more challenging. So first the thigh stays down. Sometimes just that idea of lengthening will start to lift the thigh a little bit. And then if somebody wants to lift the thigh further, fantastic. Just make sure that the pelvis and the lower back don't change, right? Unless you're going to create some new exercise, but absolutely, I'm fine with that. All right, Sarah has a suggestion of, I use a cut piece of elastic coming from the front of the hip around the knee. That might help to find length in the front of the leg too. Yeah, possibly. Anything you can get that stretch feeling, that might work. Yes, and hey Lorna, can I repeat how this can help someone with tight hip flexors? Sure. So again, we're going to use the body, and this doesn't work for everybody. This is just can work. could work. So as I'm using my hamstring, right, and my hip extensors to bend my knee, so this side of the muscle group is getting contracted, shortened, right? It's allowing the quadricep and my hip flexors up in my body to lengthen. So just the motion of doing that can help. If somebody's been sitting though for, I mean, they've had an office job, they haven't exercised much, and they've not put any length through their hip flexors in a number of years. And even when maybe when they stand up to move around, they look more like this than like that, right? Then it might be too much, right? You might not get, they may not be able to bend and get that benefit so much because it might, the balance might be a little bit off. But that would be the way I would look at it, is just for the average person, it's kind of built in lengthening. So I hope that answers that question. All right, so Leslie had a question. How would you cue a kyphotic client when finding thoracic extension? Depends on if it is a fixed kyphosis, right? So if somebody actually their spinal alignment is now, they can't flex and come out of flexion, they are flexed and that's their position now, then you're probably not going to get a lot of visual change. And we see this often with clients who have hyperkyphosis or a fixed kyphosis. You can still work on getting length. And again, you may not get an actual change out of the alignment of the vertebra, but you're still going to get the input of lengthening. So that's how I would do it. Sometimes you have to keep the hands down and the head on the hands. You might have to have, as somebody mentioned, some bolsters or pillows, but getting length, feeling that sense happening, lengthening on the front side of the body, using the breath to help with that, feeling expansion, and then the coming back to center can often give you a little bit of length that way. But yeah, it might be for somebody who's very kyphotic, not comfortable lying prone. So you may have to do this in a different position. Great question. Can you suggest a way, Juliet, for someone who may be hypermobile in their hip flexors, who have long quads and feel like there's resistance, to feel like there's some resistance or strengthening happening, right? Can you talk about lifting the pubic bone from the floor in the exercise? I don't know that I would, I don't do that as a thing to do of lifting the pubic bone, but typically the pubic bone lifts. I'm not sure where your question on that piece is going, but the pubic bone lifts because we can't maintain hip neutral. And so we start to get this lifting and moving. The front of the pelvis lifts up that way, if that's what you're talking about. But the pubic bone should really stay down, but with the whole front of the pelvis. Because to get that to come up, you're probably changing the shape of the spine a little bit. But I want to go back to the front part of you. That was a big question. So I want to make sure that I get the whole thing. So if you have somebody who is mobile, they might be hypermobile. I try not to use that word. I've used it a couple times. I don't like the term hyper. It just feels like it's so extreme, and I guess that is the point of it. But if somebody's mobile, doesn't feel a lot of stretch, they have the length of their muscle, they may not feel that. They may not feel a stretch through the front of the body at all. And in that case, I'm going to change the focus. It's not about lengthening. They already have that. So what we might talk about is changing the tempo. Can they do the kicks faster and still have control of their body? Could they do it very slow to where they, again, have a different bit of control for the body? And then I would just they would just be part of their repertoire. And if it's a private session, maybe they don't need to work on that. Maybe they need to work on some different other pattern, in which case I probably wouldn't give them a lot of the hip extension exercises to continue to practice it. They already own that. We can do exercises that have hip extension, but we don't need to practice it. And then I would work on the quality of movement and just change that a little bit. I hope that answers your question. If it ever doesn't, you guys can always contact Melissa, and I'm happy to answer further. All right, Rose has a question. In double leg kick and your head lays on the cheek, what would you suggest when the client has a limited range of neck mobility? What a great question. I sometimes don't even put my head all the way down. So if they can just turn a little bit, so again, we go into extension, is that visible? Yeah, into extension this way. And then as we come down, the head goes down and the cheek turns to the side. So sometimes I don't even put my head all the way down. You could certainly not turn the head. If that's more comfortable, they could come into their extended position. And then as they come down, just come back to the nose hovering above the mat without putting anything down. That might be more helpful. And really sometimes I just let the client choose. Here's what we do in the normal exercise, do what feels comfortable. Because at that point, that part of the exercise to me it's not rest, because you're not resting in the exercise, but it's the less intense part for the upper body, because this is now the leg kicking part, and then the whole body engages. So I would let them choose what they prefer. Good. Thanks, guys, for all the questions. I love that. All right. Good. So then let's think about a little bit some of these related exercises. So as you know, I love to think, okay, well, this is this exercise, but it also is 25 other different exercises. So the one that I mentioned before that really comes to mind on this is something like bridging. And again, if you're where you can get on your mat and do a bridge, that's great, because we're approaching the same kind of position. And so sometimes doing a bridge, getting into the knees or hips up, feet down position of hip neutral or hip extension with knee flexion, a bridge, everybody, I can't think of too many people that have never done some version of a bridge before. And so we can do an articulating bridge or just a lift up. It doesn't really matter. But the sense is that my legs are pressing downward at the same time that my pelvis is pressing upward. And then our common mistake, not that it's a mistake to do it, but it's when to do it, is that almost automatically the ribs want to lift up. Well, we haven't even gotten to our hip neutral position yet. So we want to make sure that we're getting hip joint into neutral, the thigh with the body, and the ribs stay down for just a moment. And you can imagine if I was lying on the mat, right, I was getting in the middle of single or double leg kick, my head would be turned to the side, and here's the position. I wish I could flip over really fast without making a lot of noise, but that would be the shape that we would be in that position. If we went into this and then toward the end of the movement went into some extension in our upper back, that would be fine. And that would start to look a little bit more like single leg kick. So there. Next part of it that comes to mind for me is high kneeling. And I realized that for a lot of people, high kneeling is not a comfortable position. So whether you've had a knee replacement that you've just never felt comfortable back in a kneeling position. Those of you that joined the Pilates Hour last week and you heard Brent and Beth talking about that, and she mentioned how early on that was a goal of hers, is to be able to kneel on her knee where she had her total joint replacement. And so she started on very soft surfaces like her bed, and you just kind of get into it and come out of it, and you start to desensitize the area. And, you gain the trust almost of the tissues and your body again. But if it's just not comfortable, or it's too early for something, or maybe it's even something different like a Osgood Slaughter where the tibia is, gets that irritation. So you can do it sitting. I don't recommend putting your gyrotonic stool on your trap table, but just so we can see. The idea is to be able to get into this position here, but you can tell my knee is not touching anything. So I do this a lot in my classes for people who've had a knee replacement or just aren't comfortable kneeling, is to Maybe do something like thigh stretch, right? I can't go back quite as far. I'm a little bit limited, but I can still get into this shape here. We can do even some of the rotation work. So those of you that have done any different number of like our Renedy course with Juan and Blas, or a different kind of calisthenic body weight activation movement, you have these motions here. So try it sitting on your on a stool, and it's not on your trap table. And it really makes it possible to get into the positions that you might not be able to in kneeling. But I love it because now we're getting toward the position we're going to hopefully be in through some of the day is standing and walking. And so again, we're in the hip neutral, knee flexion, and then try if you're at home where you can, or in your studio where you can move, now try your hamstring curl. So this is single leg kick, 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 stretch, kick, kick, stretch. And if you've got the balance for it, you can do both. And when you get to both, because we tend to be here a little bit, a lot of us, when you get your weight far enough forward into your knees to lift both feet, it really kind of helps you get your whole body into that tall position. Take some time though, because it will give you a pretty decent hamstring cramp if you're not used to it. If your hamstrings haven't been used in that way, think about what we do a lot of the day is stand and sit. We're not using our hamstrings in that way. So give yourself the time to build that up, and don't, obviously, if it's giving you a major cramp, maybe go back to doing it prone. All right, I see some questions coming in. Also being mindful of the time. All right, Catherine. Hey, Catherine. She says, I usually encourage my students to use a pillow, blanket, cushion while doing certain movements on the mat. Absolutely. And I tell my classes, I have one virtual class I teach every week. And I tell them, you get anything you need. Obviously, if you're in a studio, the studio should provide some of those things. And I also know clients that come to our studio in Miami and they bring their own gear. They bring their own pads and things because they know what works for them. It's the right density, it's the right shape. And a lot of clients will do that and they'll bring their own props along with them. So absolutely, that's really important. And really, that's something we should be doing to empower our clients, right? Is teach them what to use. People say, oh, you do the screening and you look at the Z sit, right, or Z sit, and the leg is internally rotated. They don't do that very well. Do you really work on a lot of internal rotation with them? And I think, well, no, not really. To me, that's not the point of doing the Z sit test. It's to see when they're sitting there, is their spine starting at a position that's not vertical and has options in all directions for movement. And I have to tell my client, hey, you should sit up on a bolster or a yoga block so that your spine can be elongated to begin the mermaid movement, right? So that's another one of those things. We should empower our clients to be doing those things. What are some other related exercises to this body position of neutral or extension, hip neutral or extension, knee flexion? All right, here we go. Good. Kneeling thigh stretch on the trap table. Yes, another couple of thigh stretches. Good. Let's go, guys. And it can be non-Pilates too, if it's non-Pilates. All right, more than just Rachel and Julia. Come on, you guys. There we go. Grasshopper. Ooh, good. Grasshopper on the spine corrector, grasshopper on the ladder barrel. That's like moving double leg kick, right? Kind of the same motion. Yay. All right. Yeah. The bow standing. Good. Semicircle on the reformer. Yeah. Oh, Christine, I think the bowing, are you talking about the bowing on the chair of the backward step down potentially? That's a great one. Upward facing dog in yoga. Yes. And then we get something that would, when the knee would bend, swan on the floor with the chair, bicycle. Yay. Good. Okay. I see them. Good, good, good. So yeah, bicycle. What a great exercise to teach this. So I love it on the spine corrector. Again, for those of you that don't know, the spine corrector, you could think about having your pelvis on an elevated ball, like maybe a Bosu or a half rounded arc of some sort. So your upper body is down, but your pelvis is lifted and your legs can do scissors and bicycles and all these motions. Get that same feeling of going around so that you don't flex your hip before your knee is bent. So if you're doing as part of side kick, which I do almost every time I teach side kick, thigh goes back, knee bends while your thigh is back there, and then you take the leg forward because that really challenges, again, the body. And you don't have much supporting you when you're lying on your side. So you've got all the different planes of movement potentially, kind of getting out of control. So that's a great one. I was also thinking about, there's even more. So more side kicks. Yes, great. Yeah, more. Wonderful. That's great. I'm seeing a lot of repeats of some of the movements. So the other ones that I was thinking about are some of the more challenging ones. So we've done our Pilates hour on parakeet. So parakeet is one. And if your hips are up in the air and you're trying to bend your knees and you accidentally bend your hips, your whole body gets very heavy. So you need to really stay up, maintain the hip extension or hip neutral, and then bend the knee. So that's a tough one. That goes right into dolphin, right? Dolphin is that same motion of bending and then diving down with the feet in the straps. The pelvic press exercise with the tower bar, getting into the hip extension part and then bending the knees to lower the shoulders down. That's another one. Yeah, good. I'm just looking to see. I'm seeing a few coming up. Somebody, yes, dolphin. I saw another dolphin on there. And then I mentioned earlier just a back bend from a yoga class or any type of back bend in any type of class. You're going into that same type of shape with the knee bent and the hip elongated. Now to go into a full back bend, you will be in much more hip extension. You'll also be in more total spine extension. But that's one of those things that we think, oh, well, I've been doing some yoga or I've been doing some Pilates. I bet I can do a back bend just like when I was a kid. And you realize, oh, wow, I actually haven't been in that shape in a long time. So it's really important to, again, condition our tissues. And just because you can't do something right now, it's not easy to do, maybe it doesn't even feel really great to do. If it's something you want to do and you don't have any underlying conditions or something that would make it not advisable to practice it, you have to continue to practice it because we want to put the load in the body. And I know that Brent and Beth talked about this last week. You have to load the tissues to create change. And there is this, there's this kind of sweet spot of you're loading, everything's going well. There's some breakdown of tissues, it builds back up, right? All the different bones and ligaments and tendons and muscles. You're having that load. That's really important. That's important in our discs, right? We want to have the discs being kind of massaged in all the positions and not just stuck in one position because we sit all the time. So just thinking about that. I hadn't done a back. I was a gymnast as a kid, not a great one, but not bad. And I was thinking, yeah, I want to do a back bend. I used to be able to do walkovers and backflips, and yeah, I want to do a back bend. And I remember the first time I did one after, I don't know, 30 years of not doing one. It was like, holy cow, this is different. But as I worked on it, I started to realize, oh, okay, I need more movement in these parts of my body. And I need a little bit more control in these parts of my body. And then it was, it was okay. And I could get into the position quite comfortably. So it just takes a little bit of perseverance with that. So hopefully you're doing those kinds of things. I will show one other, it's not exactly the same motion, but it is helpful in getting the quadriceps to be a little bit less active and the hip flexors to be a little bit active is using a ball behind the knee when you're doing your femur arcs. And we sometimes, femur arcs, oh, they're super simple, and you're watching people do it and they're not doing it really well. And other people talk about it like it's really, really hard to do. And it's such a funny, just to hear how everybody explains it. But I'll show one little adaptation that again has to do with this idea of reciprocal inhibition. The first time I saw this was with Misty, one of our educators in Colorado, and she said, "Here, try this." And a bunch of us were in a room together, and it was such a nice experience. So if you do happen to have somebody who's doing femur arcs or dead bugs, and either their hip is a little bit uncomfortable, or you're noticing that the amount of hip flexor and quad and all of that just seems a lot higher than it should be for the motion of lifting the leg up and down, try a ball behind the knee. You could also roll up a hand towel. There's lots of whatever you can get your hands on for that. And again, because you're holding the ball here, what you often will see is as people lift their leg up, instead of keeping the bend at the knee consistent, they will often do that where they'll lift the leg. So the quadricep is engaging a bit to straighten their knee out. It also, part of the quad is part of the hip flexor group, and it sometimes becomes a little bit overused. And so hold the ball, and then the feeling becomes much more of the leg holding in, and the quadricep is quite quiet. So I just love to share that with people. If there's ever a moment where coming into this tabletop or dead bug or femur arc position is really uncomfortable, or you notice it's having a huge amount of work, try that, because that's often helpful for people as they're going into the movement. And then once they learn it, then they should be able to do it without, hopefully. All right. So we got about 5 minutes left. Yeah, so Rose was talking about holding that into the hip flexors too much at tabletop. Yeah, when you get both legs up to tabletop, again, sometimes also people have difficulty with that 90-degree tabletop, or even a closer tabletop or hip flexion. Sometimes they don't have the mobility at the back of the hip, maybe some part of the capsule or the musculature at the back of the hip prevents them from coming into hip flexion. So sometimes we think, oh, tabletop, that's easy, everybody can do it. Not so for some people. So make sure that they're really the right person for it. And then maybe the ball behind the knee might help for some people. And for some people, you're going to need to have assistance. Some sort of springs, obviously, if you have equipment, or bands, or people using their hands, whatever is helpful there. Sometimes just repositioning the pelvis a little bit will help people get there, because once the legs get over, and the knee, especially the knee and the thigh, are over the hip joint, the weight of the leg, everything should be kind of balanced there. So once you get there, if you can let some of the excess musculature go, that's really what we want, because there shouldn't be a lot right at the top there. Well, all right, everybody. I hope that these have given you some points, just thinking about movement, whether it was single and double leg kick where you had a little aha moment, or maybe you just thought about some other movement. It's like, oh, I bet that we could change this, piece of it. I really, really want you to explore and change things up. Think a little bit less about right and wrong, and think a little bit more about what is your intention behind the movement. And one exercise could have 5 different intentions, probably more. So keep looking for that, keep being curious about movement. Again, if there are exercises you want to see, let us know, because we are very happy to do them with you. I love this part of it. So I will see you in a few weeks, and have a great rest of your week, everybody. And we'll see you at the next Pilates hour.